Hello, everybody. I'm Judy Clem with Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory. The Friends support the Oak Park Conservatory with volunteer opportunities, special events, and education programming such as this, along with fundraising to support the almost 100-year-old facility. As part of our mission, we want to help inspire and educate gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. So tonight we will keep learning, and we've got a new topic: drought-tolerant gardening with Chris Enroth. And I just want to mention a couple of upcoming programs, and then I'll turn it over to him. Um, our next series is called the Learn and Grow series, and that's going to be in person at the conservatory for 3 consecutive weeks in April. Our topics are going to be preparing for the growing season, tomatoes 101, and then container gardening featuring plants from our plant sale. So registration for that isn't quite open yet. It'll open in March. So keep an eye out on our website for the Learn and Grow series. Space will be limited. I'm certain it will sell out. It's going to be in person at the conservatory. I would also like to mention that our membership drive is happening now. If you join today, you'll receive 2 weeks of early shopping for our annual plant sale, and of course, free reciprocal access to nearly 400 gardens nationwide. And if you join by March 27th, you'll be entered for a chance to win a gift card to our plant sale. We're giving away a $50 gift card to the plant sale, which is a big deal. So please support us with your membership. There's many benefits listed on our website. You can go there to learn more. And I'd also like to put an announcement out about a very special program that we offer every Wednesday from 1 to 3 p.m. We offer our plant help desk. So this is a free service that we offer to the community at the conservatory, where you can bring your plants in, they can get repotted, we can answer your questions, and we have Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory volunteers staffed there with the employees in the ops room at the conservatory to help answer any questions. So please take advantage of this and bring your plants and questions on Wednesdays from 1 to 3 p.m. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. Chris Enroth has received his Bachelor's of Landscape Horticulture from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale and earned his Master's in Landscape Architecture at Kansas State University. He is currently horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, serving the Henderson, Knox, McDonough, and Warren counties. I also want to mention that our volunteer, Casey Nikoloff, is going to manage the chat for us this evening. And so please post your questions for Chris throughout, and then we'll take questions at the end of the program. And so I will stop sharing and turn it over to Chris and let you share your screen, and then we'll go from there.
All righty. Well, hopefully everyone can see my screen here. So yes, my name is Chris Enroth, and I am based in Macomb, Illinois. And so interesting weather we're having these days. Actually, right before I got on the call tonight, we had a tornado warning just a half hour south of where I'm located. So. That's kind of strange to have here in February, but we're going to be talking a little bit about the weather here at the very beginning of this class, because when we talk about drought tolerant plants, there's is kind of unavoidable. And really the idea of drought tolerance, or creating a landscape that is water wise, I see that term used a lot. Really, one of the first terms I ever heard about was this idea called xeriscaping. So let's dive in. What is xeriscaping, and where did it originate? So it really began in Colorado. And that makes sense. Out west, it's much more arid. There's not as much rainfall out there. They have to be more mindful of what they do with the precipitation, with the runoff that occurs from that. Surface water, groundwater, all of that is critical for them. But when we think about water, we think of people drinking water, plants utilizing water, but what is the major economic driver for Colorado. It's not necessarily, you know, the people that live there, it's the people that come there to go skiing. It's recreation, it's tourism. That is the main number one economic driver for Colorado. And back in the winter of 1976 and 1977, they had a winter of practically no snow. So the slopes kind of look like what we see here on the screen. Actually, the smaller black and white image, that is an actual image from back in that time from that winter of 76, 77. So when no snow fell, this was a really big deal for the tourism industry. It was also a big deal for the second biggest economic driver in Colorado, which is agriculture, because when you don't have necessarily a reliable rain source in the summer months in Colorado, you have to rely on your snow melt that occurs from the snow that accumulates over the winter. So agriculture also relies on the snow that then melts, that becomes surface water, groundwater, and so on and so forth. So this was a pretty big deal all year round. Not only for the skiers, it was a big deal for the farmers also. So the governor at that time, his name was Richard Lamb. He convened a group of experts, people to maybe see, well, what can we do if this keeps happening? Because then in the winter of actually 1980, 81, it was an even worse year for precipitation that winter for Colorado. Um, and so the governor said, you know what, if this keeps happening, we need to have a plan. We don't have enough water for people to, wash their cars, to water their lawns. And people want to have a lawn because they want to have a green lawn here in the kind of the upland arid region of the country. So they're like, how do we get what everybody needs? And this idea, this term was coined by some of these experts that was convened, and it was called xeriscaping. Now, when people hear xeriscaping, I think it kind of evokes images like this. After all, xeros is Greek for dry, and scape, of course, is vista. And so you think this is going to be a desolate desert, kind of just bleak looking landscape. So you might kind of think of an image like this with that sun bleached skull there and just nothing in the background. But that wasn't the case. Xeriscaping is really an idea of utilizing plants and having a lush and plentiful landscape full of plants. So there's a couple different styles that you can go about. You can go sort of more of that true xeriscaping, sort of high desert style of gardening, where you have a lot more rock. You have a lot more space between the plants. Or you could go a little bit more traditional type gardening, where we're just kind of we're limiting some of the high water use space that we have in our landscapes. Or we could go more of a native, kind of more of a wild or rustic look to our landscape. So we're not just relegated to granite rock and a cactus in our yard. So that's not what we're talking about today. And the ideas here stemmed from core horticultural truths or principles. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to be focused on like drought tolerant landscaping, xeriscaping, but we're really just going over these kind of fundamental horticultural principles. And that is planning and design, making sure that you're taking care of your soil, going about irrigation efficiently. We're going to look at some appropriate plant selections. I'm probably going to focus way too much on mulch. Maybe people don't need to care as much about mulch as I do, but we're going to talk about mulch tonight. We're going to talk about practical turf areas. And then finally, maintenance. And so I think that's the one a lot of people forget about. Got to take care of all this stuff. So maintenance is an important piece that I always make sure I want to include in this. All right. So the first principle is planning and design. So my background is in landscape design, landscape architecture. And so I personally do better on a project if I have had an opportunity to draw it, to write it down. Heck, even just make a list. It makes that project work better because there's something about making the brain think about it and then making that thought go all the way down to your hand and onto a piece of paper. So I highly recommend, and even I've lived in the house we're at for it's coming on 6 years now. Yeah, I am very familiar with my yard and every with my landscape, but it sure does help when I'm able to just maybe sketch something out or doodle something out. It helps that whole thought process, at least for me. And I feel like it helps for a lot of other folks when I've taught landscape design courses. They it helps us when we think about scale also. One of the ways I think of people to look at the world is the size of parking lots. So parking spaces, an average parking space is 9 by 18 feet. And so we think about, all right, how many parking spaces do you have to fill here with perennials or mulch or lawn? And that's a really easy thing for people to visualize. And when they start drawing that out on a piece of paper, it helps that plan really come into fruition. So let's talk about the steps of planning and design. The first one is taking an inventory. An inventory is really boring. You are going to have to hold yourself back from trying to design at this point in time. What an inventory is just documenting what is existing on the site. Where of the trees, the footprint of your structures, the kind of the outline of your lawn space, where's the hardscaping, looking at utilities, property lines, all that. So you're going out and you're documenting this. And the really nice thing is that there's some tools out there to help us. Now, of course, there's Google. Google Earth, you can download that and you can look at your property on the computer, on the satellite. Um, but also across Illinois, and I'm fairly certain Cook County has this, is a GIS online map. So GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. Almost every county has one. And really what it is, it's an aerial photography of the county, and it has all of the parcels laid out as shapes. And you can zoom in to your particular property, and you can see the outline, everything, and you can print a PDF and all of that. And kind of the point of GIS is for taxes, but we can use it for design. And so they often will update their aerial photography every 2 to 3 years or so, kind of depends on the county. But it's a really good way to get an aerial look of your property, and you can start sketching your inventory out on there. Now, step two is analysis. This is when we can get in a little bit of design. We're starting to think about that, but we're not quite there yet. So we're looking at relationships with the things that we've just identified in our inventory. So I say a really good way to do this is if you take a chair out to your back patio and you just sit there. You have your notepad in hand and you're documenting your experience, how you feel in that space. Is your neighbor staring at you right next door? Do you feel exposed? What's that like? Is there a nice breeze coming through? Do you hear a lot of road noise? So what is the relationships that are occurring on your site? Is it really hot? Is it uncomfortable? And so those are the things that we are documenting, sort of the step two. We're just layering this on top of our inventory. And then finally, we can start to, I would say, maybe create a list of what we want. We're not drawing anything yet. And I call this programming. So a programmer, like think of it like a computer programmer. They are designing a piece of software for someone to use. And the software has to have all these little features that the user will make their experience pleasurable. They'll enjoy it. It'll be easy when they use the software. When you program your landscape, you're going to have all these features for you, for your guests, all of that. So all of these things, what do you want to accomplish with your landscape? You might want a little gathering space. Maybe you like to grill outside. Maybe you want to have a vegetable garden. So you're just basically making a list. And, what's on your list? Well, hey, I say, sky's the limit whenever we're talking about budget. And you don't live in my house. For me, I got to piecemeal it all together. And so, I'm always going looking for those plants on sale. I always tell people don't do that, but I got to do it myself. But so what goes into your program? Well, that kind of goes with what's your budget. Um, the other really useful thing, I think, when you are identifying spaces in your property is knowing what is public, what is private, and what is service. And this helps kind of to determine like views. Who is observing what in a particular space? Well, in a public space, so in the front of the house, usually, not always, but usually, people are walking by, driving by, and they are looking inward. They're looking at the property, into the property. In the private space, very often, in the backyard, but not always, of course, people are sitting and observing, and they're looking outward. Maybe there's a view off of the property, or there's a garden bed, or there's something. They're not necessarily turned and looking back at the house. They're looking outward. And then there's a service area that nobody wants to look at. And so then there we have that. So I think this is really useful to identify what's the public space, where's your private space, and kind of where's your service areas. And this is kind of going to determine how we structure our larger plantings and our plant bed layout. Again, as we're looking at our program and we're starting to identify strategies for water conservation, shade is really a big deal. It feels like a previous life, but I used to work as like a landscape architect intern and landscape architect. And, we would go to these development sites, and all of these sites would have these beautiful trees that would then be cleared off. And it just was so painful to watch that happen, because you're losing a major asset to your site, a mature, healthy shade tree, which not only is beautiful, it is going to cool that site. It is going to add property value to that site. It has a major role to play. And so it's really hard when we come into these new subdivision developments that have been completely wiped clean, and no one has tried to work with the existing plant material at all. So shade trees are your biggest asset when it comes to water conservation. They are going to cool your yard better than anything else. A mature oak can put out the same cooling power as 4 central air conditioning units running 24 hours a day. So there's an immense cooling effect that occurs by having shade trees on your property. So I always say, protect those trees when you can. And if you don't have them, that's the first thing that should go on the ground. Forget about your perennials and all that stuff. Get those trees in the ground, because I always say, when it comes to trees investment, well, how long does it take to grow a 100-year-old oak? 100 years. So there you go. You got to start early or as fast as you can. The other thing is limiting the amount of hardscaping where possible. So we all have experienced this. We've walked across a hot parking lot before. When sunlight hits the surface of the earth, it can do one of two things. It can be reflected back as light, or it can be absorbed and then radiate as heat. And so our hardscaping is really good at absorbing sunlight and then re-radiating that off as heat. And that is how we get that urban heat island effect in our downtown areas. It's just all of the sort of impervious or kind of hard surfaces absorbing that heat all day long and then radiating that back out throughout the evening hours. So we try to reduce or limit the amount of hardscaping if possible. I put a picture in here of this patio where they have like woolly thyme growing between the cracks. I don't know how they do that. Don't ask me. It's so hard to get things to grow in a situation like that. But yeah, you know what I mean. It's try to limit the amount of hardscaping, soften it up a little bit. You also want to control that air movement too. We do want to screen views, and we don't necessarily want to see our neighbors sunbathing or our neighbors seeing us sunbathing. But there is a benefit to a breeze. We don't want to have a stagnant backyard. That's why some of those really dense hedges that we see in some backyards, how they really stagnate the air, and they can make a backyard feel more uncomfortable because there's just a limited amount of air movement when that happens, in like a smaller space. And so, I like utilizing the natural shape of some of our shrubs, pruning out. Some of the stems to allow light and air to pass through while still creating a little bit of a baffle effect, a little bit of a screening effect, but not entirely. Um, but if you do need to prevent or avoid seeing sunbathers, maybe some type of smaller screen like a fence that doesn't go all the way around the yard, but in certain key spots. Um, so yeah, those are some key things to start identifying strategies for water conservation in your program. The next step is in establishing your water use zones. So when it comes to water use zones, xeriscaping, or this idea, they sort of group them into three categories. We have our high water use zone, um, which is pretty much receives regular watering. This could be lawns. These are typically going to be the most highly visible areas. Usually, this is in the public space, the space where you want to have the best curb appeal. Um, then we have our moderate water use zone. This is going to require supplemental waters when plants might start to wilt or discolor. They show any signs of moisture stress. And then we're going to have our low water use zone. And that's really the goal. We're trying to flip as much of our landscape into this low water use zone. So they're really only utilizing natural rainfall. Even when there's drought, we're not going out to water. The only time that we're irrigating these plants is when we're putting them in the ground to get them established. Maybe that first year for establishment, and but not always. So but that's really the only time we're supplementing their water. So when it's time for drought, sorry, plants, you are on your own if you're in a low water use situation. So let's look more at like a specific example here. We have this residence, we have this driveway, and we have divided this into our low and high and moderate water use zone. So our high water use zone is going to be that turf grass right in the front yard. We want to have bright green turf grass in the front yard. I'll talk to folks who are like, I want my grass to glow in the dark. It's so green. Like, well, okay. It's going to cost a lot of money, but we'll do it. So that's usually going to be irrigated turf. Now, my neck of the woods, we don't have much irrigated turf. I live in rural Illinois. Very often it's not very common to find an in-ground irrigation system for turf grass. But when I leave my neck of the woods and I go anywhere else, irrigated turf, it is everywhere. There's a lot of in-ground irrigation systems. So that's where our high water use zone is going to be. We still allow this in like a xeriscape type landscape. We're just targeting where we're putting our water, trying to be more effective at that. We then frame that entire space with a low water use landscape planting. We take our foundation plants. I like to pull those out away from the building a little bit more and help frame that space, to frame that front entrance as well with that doorway. And we look in the backyard here. We still have lawn, pets, dogs, kids, whatever. Um, and and so maybe we only water that every so often because that's the private space. We don't necessarily need to have a bright, a perfect lawn back there. We can just irrigate it whenever it kind of just gets a little dry. And then we enframe this, or we shape this space with low water use plants and low water use design with our beds. So let's look at, again, another example. Here is a conventional landscape. So we have our residence right here outlined in bold print. There's a deck in the backyard. There's a large lawn in the front. We call this kind of wall-to-wall lawn or edge-to-edge lawn. So from property edge to property edge. Again, we have that foundation planting, which is pretty typical. It's a couple shrubs in the front, a couple perennials also. And then in the back, we sort of continue that foundation planting around the deck. And then we have another large turf space. And then there's just sort of a hedge in the backyard. And so we have a very large high water use space. If we would want to irrigate that entire front yard. So it's a very large space. Now, usually foundation plants, they're pretty low maintenance. That's how the nursery industry, that's how we do them. We don't want to have a high maintenance foundation planting. So usually they're low water use. And then we have, of course, all that turf grass in the back, which if you kick on the irrigation system every so often, we call that maybe a medium water use. But we still have a large square foot of our water use area. So let's apply some xeriscaping principles of the high, moderate, and low water use areas. So we're going to shrink our turf space in the front. And by doing so, we're actually going to we're going to put a landscape bed in that bottom right-hand corner there. We're going to put a larger tree on the left side. We're going to frame that front yard so that the view is looking towards the door. It frames it. That's where our eyes go to. And when we have these seas of turf grass, the view or that whole like framing idea of your home just gets lost in this kind of sea of turf grass. And so we're going to utilize plants to shape this space, to shape our lawns, as opposed to the other way around. If we look in the backyard, we've taken that space and we've cut that turf grass in half, maybe in a quarter. And we've incorporated maybe more of our programming. If there's kids, we just kind of have this area for children to play, and we're again using our plant material to shape these spaces and not define our yards and landscapes by just lawn. Now I might sound like I'm very anti-lawn. I teach the turf grass class for our master gardeners, so I mean I spend plenty of time trying to save lawn as well. So I think that we can have a good balance though. So let's talk about the second principle. We'll talk about soil and how we manage our soil. And what do we usually use to amend our soil? Well, it's going to be organic matter. Organic matter is probably one of the best things that we have going for us here in Illinois. I know where you're located, it's a different soil type, definitely more of a disturbed type with development, as opposed to where I'm at in rural Illinois, where we're just like putting plants in the ground and they're doing fine. So healthy soil equals healthy plants. That's kind of the moral of that story. And we have a really healthy amount of organic matter, especially in my neck of the woods. It's not uncommon to see anywhere from like a 5 to 6% organic matter content, and that's just because it wasn't too long ago that was prairie, and so there hasn't seen much bulldozer activity, hasn't seen much disturbance, as opposed to maybe a more urban type area. So adding organic matter can be beneficial to our soils. If you have a heavy clay soil or a sandy soil, it can break up that heavy clay structure, or it can help to maybe bind some of that looser sandy structure. And the thing about organic matter, usually in the form of compost, is that it can help to decrease our irrigation needs. So if we have, say, a 3% organic matter if we have a cubic foot of soil and 3% of that is organic matter, that organic matter on it by itself is holding 1 gallon of water in that cubic foot. And so that's an incredibly valuable resource for our plant roots. So organic matter is really important. We're really lucky in our part of the world to have a decent amount of organic matter in our soils. But I know when they go to build a house, a lot of times we lose that topsoil. So I do recommend to become as familiar as you can with your soil, doing a soil test. I mean, I work for Extension. I don't know if I'd get my paycheck this month if I didn't tell you to do a soil test. But it is really important because a lot of times, folks will come to me when there's issues, when there's problems, and I'll say, well, have we done a soil test? Have we ever tried to monitor nutrient levels, or do we know pH at all? Do we know what's happening in your soil? It's usually no. I'm just adding amendments because I saw the neighbor doing it, so I thought maybe I should do it. You could maybe save some money, save some water, not have to worry about some of these particular amendments if you know your nutrient content, your pH levels, and a few other items that you can glean from a soil test. Excuse me. So what do we do if maybe you want to add some organic matter to your soil? Let's say you live in a typical residential subdivision that has had the topsoil scraped off. That topsoil is sold, some goes somewhere else. So we want to come in and we want to amend our soil. So if we don't have plants in the ground, this is pretty easy. You know, we can top dress with compost. We can even till that in if we want to. Um, and we can add that in, as deep as we would want to go. Usually we say go 2 to 6 inches deep when you're tilling. Um, and so that is really beneficial. Now, I would not recommend just tilling alone because tilling alone actually introduces a lot of oxygen and water to your soil, and that fires up microbial activity, which then eats the organic matter. It eats those carbohydrates that's in that organic matter. And so you actually wind up, if you till and you don't add organic matter, you actually wind up losing organic matter over time. So it's one of those detrimental effects of tillage that can happen. So if you are going to till to try to loosen up your soil, I always recommend add a little bit of organic matter in, so we are adding it back. We're not going to lose it. So hold on. A note on native trees and native plants. So when it comes to amending soil, we can go too far. I have seen landscape beds that have been amended to garden soil. I don't know how else to describe it, but beautiful, loamy, lush soil. The envy of every gardener in the county. And you put a native plant in there, and that native plant hates it. It's too nice. They need a little bit more adversity in their life, I think. The same thing goes when we plant our trees. If we just would amend that planting hole by itself, why would that tree ever spend energy to leave that beautiful planting hole that we made for it? Why would it ever want to establish out in that native soil? So we really do we can overdo it with our native plants, and when we're talking about amending spaces for our trees, we need to amend a large space, ideally wherever the roots go, and tree roots can go very far, 3 to 5 times the width of that canopy. And so I would say if you're planting a tree in like gumbo clay, put a 5-gallon bucket of compost in there and stop. Don't add any more. That's all you're allowed, I guess, from here on out. But sometimes we feel like we got to add something to that. But ideally, we would amend a much larger area. Okay, let's talk about efficient irrigation. We're not saying we can't do irrigation. We're going to do it more efficiently. And so again, we are zoning our irrigation system. The high water use zone, that's still going to receive an irrigation system. That moderate water use zone, maybe that's going to get some type of a drip system. Or maybe you'll just monitor that more and water by hand. Again, that low water use zone, you're not watering that at all once those plants are established. But let's talk about irrigating turfgrass first. Now, irrigating turfgrass, we're irrigating across an area. We're like the surface. The entire surface is getting water. Now, pictured on the screen here, on the left side of the screen, this is called a spray irrigation head. It's this constant just fan of water that just shoots out. And then on the right side of the screen is the rotor irrigation head, that kind of like the old-fashioned tick, 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 brrr, like the typewriter. It's that single stream of water that just sort of rotates around. Both of these are not the most efficient way to deliver water to our lawns. And a lot of water is wasted when we utilize these. So the irrigation industry has kind of figured this out. They've hybridized it a little bit. They call these like spray rotors. It's essentially a combination of these two, where it delivers water a little bit more slowly so our soils can absorb them and the water doesn't run off. And it also is, because it's delivering a little bit more slowly, we're getting a much deeper infiltration rate, which is beneficial to our like turfgrass roots going a little bit deeper in the soil as opposed to just staying in that top like inch of soil. The other benefit too, sort of like the spray head on the left side of the screen, that can deliver a lot of water really quickly. So when we hybridize this, that means we don't have to have the irrigation system on for as long. I absolutely love drip irrigation. I use it in my vegetable garden predominantly, um, and it saves a ton of water. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of watering, and it uses so much less water, 30 to 50% less water than overhead irrigation. So if you do irrigate your vegetable garden or landscape beds, I highly recommend switching over to a drip irrigation system. They've gotten much easier to work with. When I first started this, working with these in like 2004 and five, boy, drip irrigation systems were so kind of intimidating. They would clog. They seemed like there are all these different parts and pieces. Now you just go into any lawn and garden center, you can just buy a kit that has everything you need, and it's just sort of like I call it Legos for grown-ups. And so you just plug everything in and you just plug it together. There's a few different types. So on the left side of the screen, this is sort of like this is a drip line. So this line has holes or emitters all along it, and it will irrigate this entire bed. You just put mulch over top of that. You can put annuals and other perennials and things throughout there. On the right side of the screen, we have these singular emitters that you would just sort of stake right near the base of a plant, and then just allow that to drip, drip, drip. I set mine on timers. And that is just it's an incredibly easy way. My timer is actually Bluetooth, so I can go on my phone and I can turn it on and off. It's getting so much more better when it comes to irrigation. I don't have to call the neighbor up if I'm out of town, like, hey, can you turn on my sprinkler system, please? I just do it from my phone wherever I'm at. And there's another example of this drip line here, going around probably a bald cypress right there, irrigating that tree. So I think if you do want to maintain a green lawn all summer long, you do have to water. In Illinois, I mean, we get plenty of rainfall. Usually drought is not as big of a concern for us, um, but if it does get hot, it does get dry in the summer, and our cool season lawns will want to go dormant when we hit that time period. But if you want to keep it green, this is how much water you need to apply every single week, 1 to 1.5 inches of water. Now, if you wanted to measure that, you could put out like a rain gauge. Actually, a really easy way is get a tuna fish can, make tuna noodle casserole, because a tuna fish can is 1 inch deep. You stick that out by your sprinkler. Just see how long that takes to fill up. It takes a long time. It uses a lot of water. So an inch, inch and a half of water, that's a lot of water if you want to keep your lawn green all summer long. Now, if you are going to water, only water when your lawn needs it. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm going to kick the irrigation system on early, even if we have a nice wet spring, and that way, get the lawn off to a good start." You don't need to do that. I mean, actually, a little bit of water stress can help your lawn kind of encourage it to grow a little bit more deeper root system. If we're just spoon feeding water to our lawns all year long, then it's not going to develop a more resilient root system. So wait to turn on that irrigation system if you have one. Water deeply and infrequently. That's really important. We don't want to water in the middle of the day when it's 95 degrees and a 20-mile-per-hour wind. We want to water deeply and frequently early in the morning where possible. And use a smart irrigation controller. These are becoming more and more popular. It's pretty much required if you have an irrigation system out west where they have much bigger water issues than we do. So just some kind of reasons why, our outdoor water use for our lawns accounts for about 9 billion gallons of water every day. That's a lot of water. Especially, it kind of hurts me too when I water my some of my plants. I'm like, boy, we just spent a lot of energy to clean this water, make it potable, and here I am dumping it out on the ground. And so just it's something to be mindful of. And a lot of water is wasted due to overwatering, up to 50%. So the EPA does certify, they have a certified water sense program. So any irrigation equipment that is working to limit that amount of water use or waste will have this logo on it. So controllers, they can save you thousands of gallons of water every year. And if you're worried about, well, does my particular irrigation company make this? They all do. These are all smart irrigation controllers right here, made by all the different big irrigation companies. And so, when it rains, it knows not to water. If it starts raining in the middle of your irrigation timing, it knows not to water. A lot of the even advanced systems will know based upon the temperature, the wind speed. It can calculate the evapotranspiration rate of your plant, so how much water your plant's losing, to know when to kick on. And even if you haven't had much rain lately, but evapotranspiration is not that bad, your plants aren't losing much water, it won't kick on. So it can save so much water, and they operate just kind of on their own, so it helps. Pretty common in my neck of the woods is there's no irrigation systems here. When it gets hot and dry, our cool season lawns go dry, they dry up and they go dormant. They're not dead, they go dormant, and this is their defense mechanism to survive the hot, dry parts of the summer, to then wake back up once cools off a little bit and we get a little bit more rain later on in the growing season, which hasn't been happening lately. We've had some very dry autumns, and these last 3 to 4 years now. And so we're actually still in a water deficit, even today with well, we haven't had that much snow, but we're still very dry. We're far below the mark that we need to be at. So the goal with irrigation and xeriscaping is to reduce the amount of water we use. We want to use as little water as possible. So again, to reiterate, we're watering routinely in those high water use areas. We're not. This would not be a popular thing if we told people they can't water their lawn, and so that's really why this is in here. You're going to supplement water in those moderate use areas as needed, and let those cool season lawns go dormant if you can. I understand not everybody can. Sometimes even city code or covenants or any of those restrict that. All right, let's talk about plant selection. And we saw this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to blow this up right now and say, what is probably the best suited plant for a drought-resistant garden in Illinois? It's going to be our native plants. So this is an illustration of a lot of our native prairie plants that were found historically in Illinois. And look at the root systems. In most of these cases, the root systems are more extensive than the above ground growth. They're going down several feet. So the chart here, if it's hard to see on your screen, goes down to 15 feet deep. That's what the chart does right here. Now, there is one non-native plant on here. If you look on the left side of the screen, the far left, right there, that little plant right there, that's Kentucky bluegrass. Look at the root system on that. Now, we've all dug up sod before. We know that root system only goes down an inch or two, and that's what we see with this. Now, if we go to the opposite end of this illustration, we have buffalo grass. This is a native grass species. Look how deep that root system goes. So we can see, like, when it comes to resilience, our native plants have got it in the bag. So that's going to be a big one that I would recommend to you to look at first. But I'm not a native plant only kind of person. I like to collect plants. I like lots of different types of species out there, provided they're not horribly aggressive or, of course, listed invasive species. But if we look at some of our more drought adapted plants out there, some of our creeping juniper ground covers out there are probably going to be the king in this particular category. They're just tough. They're darn tough. A lot of people don't like junipers either, but there's a reason. They're really tough. Some of our others, like our feather reedgrass, some of the miscanthus, I really hesitate even saying that word out loud. I see a lot of miscanthus escaping anymore. I have, the former owner of our home had zebra grass, and boy, I'm just fighting that thing right now. Kind of wanted to get rid of it, but it just keeps coming back. Some of our shrubs out there, though, we have abelia, we have butterfly bush, which is a non-native, and if you would be in certain states, especially out east, that would be considered an invasive species. Um, it still doesn't, the top growth still doesn't survive our winters here, at least here where I'm at. Um, but it's a pretty darn tough plant, and when it comes to drought. Common boxwood. Now, boxwood, it's in here because it is the number one selling plant in the entire green industry. Uh, it might only be second to what hydrangeas and then poinsettias. Like those are kind of like the big ones. Um, Poinsettias being only sold between November and December. But boxwood's in here, and again, that's one of those where I'm kind of like, I'm not quite sure if I would quite put this in here, but it's pretty darn tough. I know there's the boxwood blight that's kind of on the horizon for this poor plant, but it's tough. It's not terribly invasive or aggressive, so um, I really am starting to fall in love with some of our witch hazels out there. There's a couple different species listed here as the vernalis species, um, and when it comes to hydrangea. Oak leaf hydrangea is probably going to be the most drought tolerant. Now, be mindful that the word water is in the name. Hydra, water, likes water. So this is not going to necessarily be the plant for drought tolerant landscapes. But if you really like hydrangeas, oak leaf's going to be your one. A lot of times I see this marketed as a native plant. It's not historically native, central or northern Illinois, and barely native to southern Illinois. It's really a southeastern plant for the U.S. I do love Virginia sweet spire. It has a soft spot in my heart. I've seen Virginia sweet spire growing in standing water. I've seen it growing in almost sand. It's a tough plant, beautiful white flowers, red fall color. And of course, so shrub junipers, a lot of the viburnums. There's a really interesting hollies out there. Some of the deciduous ones. Some of my favorites are the inkberry holly. Most spireas are pretty drought tolerant. And of course, I can't have a list of drought tolerant plants without mentioning yucca. But I often say the name yuck is in that for a reason. So just be careful if you put yucca in your yard. We go a little bit bigger plants, some of our smaller trees. I actually grew up, my parents had some timber. We had some hornbeams in our neck of the woods. Beautiful, tough trees. When it was, when all of the other trees were sort of suffering from drought, hornbeams seemed to really take it in stride. Some of our red buds, smoke tree, that deciduous possum hall holly. Now, I have crepe myrtle on here. I am a little bit farther south than you are, but interestingly, I have been growing crepe myrtle in Quincy, Illinois, which is where my parents' house is, probably for 26 years, since 2000, pretty much. Uh, um, Even when they were still listed as Zone 5, now they're Zone 6. Um, it's it survives the winters, and it's creeping its way north. I love Osage orange. It's the hedge apple. People hate it. I love it. It's a tough thing. If you have to cut this with a chainsaw, get help and get extra chainsaw blades. Tulip poplars are a favorite. Now, tulip poplar is interesting because one of its defense strategies when it gets droughty is to actually shed leaves. And so people will say, well, Chris, why do you like this one? Because it doesn't seem drought tolerant. Well, it has a pretty darn good defense mechanism when it comes to drought tolerance. It actually sheds leaves so that, if you don't have those leaves present, it's not going to lose water through those leaves. Are you raking leaves in the middle of the summer? Yeah. But I still really like the tree. Sweet gum, again, people are saying you must be crazy to recommend sweet gum. It's an amazing plant. It's only hardy to zone 5, so probably going to be okay. I know in Cook County we have that heat island effect, kind of that lake effect too, that warmer pocket right there. But the sweet gum has the gum balls, so just be warned. Nyssa sylvatica or black gum is kind of more known. Also, we'll lump bald cypress in with this too, as like a wetland adapted plant. They do just fine in dry soil. All right. Some of our more perennials, yarrows, asters, butterfly weed is a favorite. false indigo is my personal favorite perennial. Super tough, drought tolerant. Goldenrods. I know Canada goldenrod gives them a bad name, but there's there is hundreds of goldenrod species out there, and we have just scratched the surface with them. So I am going to show you real quick. I'm probably gonna have to swap my screen. All right, so you are probably now seeing the pollinator website plant selector tool. And this is a great resource to use. This is made by us, Illinois Extension, and this has a nice little filter, whether you have dry, medium, wet soil, different light conditions, when do you want it to bloom, what color bloom do you want it to be, how big do you want it to be, and we have all of these native plants. Now, the overall goal of this is pollinators, but again, we can just filter for dry locations. And it will automatically update to recommend plants for drought tolerance. We have just some of my absolute favorite plants on there. But you do have to be careful because we have common milkweed, which if you have a small yard, I would say you probably don't want to plant common milkweed. You probably would want to plant orange butterfly weed, which is also a milkweed. But let me click on this one right here. This is lead plant. So just in as example here, what you would find on this website is all of the information. Is it commercially available? Lead plant is usually commonly available. It's a small shrub. And of course, we have these beautiful pictures. It has these purple petals with these like kind of yellow-orange stamens, anthers on them. Here's the lead plant out in a prairie. And you can see this plant has kind of a lighter color foliage with some pubescence on it. That's a drought mechanism to resist water loss and keep the plant cooler. Close up of the flowers, and again, that kind of lighter color pea-like foliage that plant has. So, it's a beautiful plant. Highly recommended. Very, very drought tolerant. Really good for utilizing this for a drought tolerant landscape. We have lots of others here that I can recommend. Boy, Rattlesnake Master, absolutely love it. It is one of those that when I was growing up, nothing would grow in this particular spot in my folks' yard. It was full blazing sun. Not even the weeds would grow there. My mom put Rattlesnake Master there, and it thrived. And if you want to know a good goldenrod to look for, Shoei goldenrod is a good one. Mount Cuba Center also has just released their goldenrod report. I believe it was Fireworks goldenrod, which is Solidago rugosa, that was top winner in that. And when it comes to drought tolerance, they watered those plants once when they put them in the ground. All right, I am going to swap back to my presentation. All right, so this is the website where you could just Google IllinoisPollinators.org and it'll take you there. Now remember, the plants are not saving water. You as the designer are saving the water by siting the plant in the correct location and managing them appropriately. All right, time to dive into mulch. Mulch is our best friend when it comes to water, reducing our water use, and kind of also reducing a lot of the maintenance that can occur. There's a lot of different types of mulches out there. I'm going to tell you some of my favorites that I use, but these two are not my favorite. First are the rock mulches, which if we lived in Colorado or Arizona or out somewhere more arid, yeah, we could utilize more of those granites or river rock and something like that. And I am obviously biased because as a landscaper, I've had to haul a lot of wheelbarrow loads of gravel to the landscape. So I'm just not a big fan of rock. It can really elevate that temperature, which then creates a little bit more water demand for our plants. And from a horticultural standpoint, I don't see how it does much soil improvement. And then, of course, we have rubber mulch, which usually is just shredded rubber tires that they will dye and then say, hey, here's some mulch. Not a fan of that either. I am a huge fan of wood mulch. The one of the things is that wood mulch breaks down and it adds organic matter back to the soil. It creates habitat, it creates food for the microorganisms and the macroorganisms. Now, some things to know is that there's not all wood mulch is the same. Our shredded mulch is going to it's going to knit together, and it's going to do this. So this is a shredded mulch that I put in my yard. You can see these shredded fibers, how they sort of just came together and formed a shell. This shell created drought conditions underneath of it because water couldn't get through that. Water would shed off and run off, and even after a rain, it'd be dry as a bone underneath our mulch pile. So here's that shell right there of shredded mulch. I really do like chipped up trees, arborist wood chips, essentially. That's what's pictured here on the left side of the screen. I've made a good relationship with some of our local arborists when they are in the neighborhood cutting up trees and they shred those trees up. They know that they can drop them off in my front yard and I will take them in a heartbeat. I also have some shredded cedar chips that I've also used. I really like that. Now, the big thing with these is that they don't knit together. They allow water and air to flow through them. And so that is really useful as an insulation factor too, well, when it comes to, letting moisture go through and oxygen as well. This is a rain garden where we used arborist wood chips as we just installed the plants. And I know a lot of people don't like the look of the lack of uniformity when it comes to wood chips, but over time the color all fades no matter what you use, and it all just sort of blends together. Now, what I don't suggest is landscape fabric. This is when I was still a landscaper before I knew better. I was trained to put landscape fabric down and then put mulch on top of that. But what happens? Well, the mulch breaks down, but the fabric then starts poking up and you get all these weeds. And so it's not a very effective, it's not good for soil health or soil building. There was a study done that shows that essentially the best mulch is thick, as in the depth, and chunky. Again, it allows water and air to move through it. It's not shredded. It doesn't knit together. So those are the key takeaways there for that mulch. And so I utilize these arborist wood chips that got dropped off in my yard, and I just spread these out, and I'm just killing grass all over my yard, just killing grass and making bigger planting beds, putting more plants in the ground, just utilizing this arborist wood chips. I have this natural cut edge right here. Again, you can see the sticks, you can see the twigs, you can see everything, and does not bother me. And my wife came around on it. So here's this. I just did this last fall actually. Put this bed in, started planting it up with hostas. So big takeaways: arborist wood chips. You can go pretty deep on this stuff, 4 to 6 inches deep. Shredded leaves, don't forget about those because those are a very useful asset we can use for adding organic matter back to our soil. And a lot of people ask about pine straw. It's not readily available in our neck of the woods, but it is a pretty good mulch. You can put that one pretty deep also, up to 8 inches deep. It's a great insulator for our trees. So if you're mulching your trees, extend that mulch 2 to 3 times the canopy of the tree, if possible. I know that's easier said than done. You don't want the mulch to be piled up against the trunks of trees or shrubs. And if you do have shredded mulch, you're going to need to cultivate it to kind of break that shell up over time. Don't forget about compost, though. Compost is another really good one. I use this one quite a bit. You can use it as a mulch. Usually I'll add maybe a 1/2 inch layer of compost underneath, and then I'll put my wood chips on top. So it's a really key ingredient for me. There's just a compost pile with some wild poison hemlock growing out of it. So be careful of horse manure, which is where that came from. And then cover crops. People asked about this also. Cover crops are great because it covers the soil and it prevents, when in the wintertime especially, that wind from pulling that moisture out of the ground. We have living roots in the ground all winter long, which is beneficial. Here it is after a winter kill. And then there's my sweet potatoes there that following year. Yep, cover crops are definitely useful. Real quick, we're almost done, promise. Practical turf areas, the sea of lawn that we see. This is the conventional nature of our turf grass. These are for soccer players, right? This is where a whole team of soccer players lives in this house, I think. Let's, as I said, define our landscapes with our landscape plants, not with our lawns. And so shaping space with our plants, with our structures, not letting our lawns just completely take over. We do have no-mow lawns. This is a plot at U of I in Champaign. Some different no-mow lawn species, mostly fine fescues. This is a buffalo grass edging. This was used to be all lawn. We converted it to a rain garden, and we edged that rain garden with buffalo grass. This is in Kansas, by the way. And we also have these no-mow fine fescues as well. So if you wanted to go that route, we could. It's a lower input lawn. This is an aerial photograph. You look at that house, you can see the stripes in the lawn. It's perfect there. But if you look to the house just above it on the north side, well, there's not a grass blade in sight. There's not a lawn at all. And we can look at this in the street view. This is a xeriscaped or a water-wise or a drought-tolerant landscape. It's everything's kind of handled. Drainage is sort of oriented to feed the plants through bioswales and just good drainage patterns. And so, yeah, you can totally eliminate lawn if you want. And finally, maintenance. A lot of times people will do a lot of inputs because they're not necessarily maintaining things at the best time. So when it comes to lawn, because this is our biggest water use, if you want to rehab or overseed or do anything, when it comes to cool season lawns, it's going to be late summer, early fall. That's the best time to do it. I know we're itching to do it right now. Save some time and money, do it late in the season instead of early in the season. So mow high, mow often with sharp mower blades. That's your lawn mowing mantra. That'll get you 80% of the way there. Fertilizer, aeration if you want. I don't recommend aeration that often anymore. I don't know if it's as effective as, like, say, a golf course would do it, because they do it far more often and far more densely. They take a lot more cores out of the ground. And then top dressing with compost. That might be the number one thing you can do in terms of soil health, and adding organic matter back to your soil is adding compost or organic matter back. Don't forget about the weeds, because in a landscape that has low water, this is your competitor now. So dandelions don't bother me in my lawn, because I got a lot of other things besides turf grass growing in my lawn. But in the garden or in the landscape bed, I do control things like dandelions. Know when plants are stressed. Like I said, hydrangeas, they don't like drought. But is this a drought-stressed hydrangea? It is not. It's just simply hot, and it wilts when it's hot. You could dump 50,000 gallons of water on this thing. It won't stop wilting. When it cools off, the leaves will perk back up. But that tree, poor little thing, is scorched. The leaves are dead. Those little milk jugs there were not enough to provide water. I say have a survival watering plan if you want to have like an emergency source of water. Rain barrel's not going to get you very far, but maybe it'll keep a couple tomato plants alive if there's a water restriction. Some folks go all into a rainwater harvesting systems, which is legal here in Illinois. We can do that. You can't do that in other states. But however, gray water, which is sort of the drain water from the kitchen sink and all that, that is not legal to use in Illinois unless your municipality has a law or rule that supersedes the state code. I just want to leave you with an example here of a xeriscape garden. This is in Edmond, Oklahoma. This beautiful xeriscape space that has perennials, trees, lawns, places to sit, gather. It's been designed using water use zones from low to moderate. And it is a real space right here. Look at their use of mulch, their use of ground covering plants, their use of grasses, fine textured. There's a drip line right there, so they're not eliminating irrigation. They're only using it sparingly, and they're using drip irrigation, which is more efficient. And of course, they have their turf grass there as well for people to kind of lounge and play and recreate. And this is managed by volunteers there. See that? So this is definitely something that we can all achieve. I wish I had that many people to help me in my yard, But fortunately, I don't. I have three strapping boys, though, that occasionally help. If you want to hear me prattle on more and longer, if you just didn't get enough tonight, we do have a weekly podcast called the Good Growing Podcast that we do, Ken Johnson, my colleague, and myself. And we have a weekly blog that we put out every single week. So you can go hear either of these and subscribe to them and learn more about whatever weekly topic we feel like talking about. I think this week it was weird, unique fruits to grow in the backyard. So talked about a couple different ones. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I will see what the chat holds.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This was a really educational presentation. You should do this for a living. We have just a few questions in the chat right now. All of them are about wood chips and mulch, just to set the stage here. So
All right.
I will start at the top with a question from Susan. And she is asking, what do you think about the colored wood chips that come in bags in places like Home Depot?
Oh no. I uh don't take my bias as something to dissuade you because I am a mulch snob. I'll say that much. I'm not a big fan of the colored mulches. Not only just because of the aesthetic, but so our master gardeners, we were once putting in a project and we had that was like a brown dyed mulch, and we were just putting the bags out, ripping the bags up, putting them out. And I lifted one kind of shovelful up, and I noticed the outline of where the door latch would go into a door jamb. So this was obviously a piece of construction wood material that had come from I don't know where. Um, it was obviously a chipped up 2x4, and so when we started kind of fishing around in the other bags, we were like, oh, this is just construction waste. And so doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad thing, but where did it come from? You were kind of like, all right, well, was this part of a storm? Were there chemicals or something mixed in here? Like, where did this all come from? Like, is there lead paint? We don't know. So I'm a little snobbish about that. Don't let it dissuade you. You can definitely use those the dyed wood chips. I just like my free arborist wood chips that I get.
On that note, Chris, can fresh arborist wood chips pull nitrogen out of the soil and plants suffer?
They can if you till them in. So if you let them lay on top of the soil, they are not going to become a suck or a sink that's not going to pull nitrogen away from your plant roots. Because if it's just sitting on the soil surface, really just that top eighth of an inch, that interface between the soil and the wood chips themselves, that's the only microbes that are going to be accessing those wood chips to start breaking them down. But if we would till it in, well, now we got all the microbes in the soil profile going to town here on the wood chips, which ties up the nitrogen, which then steals that away from availability for plants. So as a mulch, you're fine, but it's when we start tilling the organic matter that has not been decomposed yet. It's when we start doing that, that's when we lose nitrogen.
And then back to a question from Susan. Should we be concerned about diseases that might be in arborist mulch when it comes from dead trees?
Great question. And that is one that I ask myself all the time. And I'm thinking, is this going to be a problem in the future? So, when it comes to some of the research done, we do know that when it comes to a particular species like honey locust, there is a canker, I think it's hypoxylin canker of honey locust. They have shown that a chipped up infected honey locust that then applied around another living honey locust can transfer that disease. There's also concern about verticillium wilt being transferred from chipped up trees. Now, something like oak wilt, we're pretty certain that doesn't transfer in wood chips, provided you don't have large hunks or big logs of oak that gets left behind. If you break it down to sort of like I think the Illinois sort of like standard, like the ANSI code that wood chippers need to break things down, it's like 2 square inches. And that's really because like things like emerald ash borer, things like that, they can't survive in that small of a piece of wood. Um, and I think that's sort of the maximum size of all wood chippers. They have to chip everything underneath that. Um, so large chunks, I might be a little bit more concerned about it, but the smaller, like 2 inch square area or less, you should be okay.
Perfect. And then our last question in the chat comes from Caitlin, who says, I stopped mulching every year because the mulch did not seem to break down and their soil level rose. Did she use too much mulch or perhaps the wrong kind?
That's a great question. So if it was the shredded mulch, when I was a landscaper, we would be hired by homeowners to come in and freshen up the mulch and basically top dress the mulch. And I remember at one point in time, taking my shovel and sort of like cutting like a sort of a profile. And you could see it was that shredded mulch that knits together, and it was like an archaeology dig. I could just see every year that we had come and added mulch to the site there. And because it had knit together and it created a really inhospitable habitat for our microorganisms, it didn't break down that easily. And so, yeah, if it was shredded mulch, definitely I've seen that. You just got to get out there and with a rake or a cultivator or something and just really break that shell up. And so that it just sort of mixes together more, because it will just layer on top of each other.
Awesome. Well, I will hand it back to Judy, and I just have to say I'm glad to know that the term for the landscaping I've been admiring is xeriscaping because I think it looks fantastic. So appreciate the education to,
Excellent.
this evening. So, all right, well,
Sure.
back to you, Judy.
Thank you, Casey. Chris, thank you so much. This was amazing. And I think we were all like on the edge of our seats tonight. So thank you for sharing
Oh
this
boy.
program with us. I mean, I was, and I know a lot of the people on this chat. So, I think we're all just sponging it up. And we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. So I did post your pollinator plant selector into the chat. And I'm happy to grab that and email it out to folks who couldn't be with us tonight. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.